With Jeff Elkins. Hi, Jeff.
Hi,
How you doing?
I'm great. Doing really well. Got the day off of work, so it's nice. Sitting at
All right.
home, quiet house. Yeah, empty world. It's very, very rare for me. So, yeah, it's great. Perfect day to do this.
Sounds peaceful. So just so people know who you are before we get started, Jeff Elkins is the founder of Short Fiction Break, an online fiction magazine, and the co-author of the Defensive Reality series of urban fantasy novels. And you were just telling me that your books are a cross between like paranormal thriller and mysteries. You're doing some mystery too.
Yeah, we talk about we're shooting for if you've ever seen the TV show The Wire by David Simon that was on HBO. They're kind of set in that context in Baltimore City, but they take more of like a Stephen King-esque bend with, monsters running around and homeless superheroes fighting them. And
Yeah. The
it's fun.
fabric of reality slowly tearing apart.
Absolutely. Yeah. It starts with a reporter hunting a serial killer who then discovers that he's actually stumbled on this underground world and his adventures there. Yeah.
Cool.
I've had a great time writing it. We're 5 books in. 6 books should come out in November. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Congrats. That's a deep series.
Thanks, man. Yeah. It's one of those things. It's been a 3-year investment. So coming to a stopping place. We planned 11 books in the series total. So coming to a stopping place feels really weird. But I'm excited. It'll be first half done. Anyway.
Nice.
Yeah,
well, we're here today to talk about another novel, a mystery novel called The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. So we both read this book, and you read it a little bit more recently. I actually read it a few months ago because I was exploring classic science fiction that I'd missed out on. And you told me that this is the first Asimov book you read too, right?
Yeah, I was super happy that you asked me to read it because it is. It was amazing. It's my first. I don't think I've even engaged in any of his short stories. So it was the first. My initial. I'm an Asimov virgin. It was my initial experience to Asimov. It was great.
Cool. So do you think that it held up with, this novel was published in 1954, and I'll read a blurb from it in a minute in case anybody wants to know what the story's about, and we'll get into details there. But the novel was written in 54. It's 60 years old. Do you think it still holds up?
It's got that classic detective noir feel. He's not a detective. The lead character is a cop, not a detective. But it's definitely got that rugged whiskey drinking individual-esque square jaw detective. You picture him wearing a trench coat and a fedora, running around. So in that kind of space, I thought it was fantastic. It held up great. It's very similar to several movies. There's clearly several movies that aren't directly based on it, but kind of encompass it. I enjoyed it better than some of them. And then sometimes it doesn't really, it doesn't have as much action as you wish it did. It's a modern day kind of detective novel, but the story itself and the mystery was fantastic. And the writing's amazing. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah, for sure. It's also the first book in the I, Robot series. So this kind of sets up the whole universe.
Yeah, and it does a great job with that. Mm-hmm. I loved it. How did you connect to it? Did you like it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I've gone back recently and reread a lot of classic sci-fi authors, and I'm always surprised by the ones that hold up and the ones that feel kind of dated. And there are definitely things, especially in the technology sphere, the tech that the detective has in this supposedly future world that's set 3,000 years in the future. You're why don't they have that? Because we have these smartphones being a great example, but it was written in 54, and they didn't envision them the same way that we did. They obviously have comms tech, but it's just different. And some things are still a little bit old fashioned. But that said, I never feel like Asimov's prose feels dated. It still feels very easy to read, very current. And so it's actually fun to read. And of course, because it follows a mystery structure that we as watchers and readers are so used to now. And I think in the 50s, this was actually a little bit pioneering, that you could apply science fiction to a mystery structure, because people were like, oh, you can't do that. Sci-fi has its own like adventure structure, or whatever they used to, sci-fi just used to have a different structure in the 40s and 50s in Pulp Fiction. And it was slowly applied to the other genres where they didn't usually mix mystery and sci-fi. And Asimov was like, well, actually, you can just do it like this.
Yeah, that's really, and it's, I think one of the things that really holds up, we will probably get into this a little bit later, but, he kind of defined robot cyborg literature, right? Like his like robot rules are like still like the basic rules for sci-fi. And so that stuff feels like you're reading a modern novel because it's all based on him. So like none of that's, none of that's different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because we're still not like quite at the point where we have like sentient robots like he depicts. Like, we have like a Roomba and like, weird, like basic servant. or have you seen those things? They have these robots that will deliver ice to people's hotel rooms now. It just like knocks on your door and you open the door and then you like lift the lid and take your ice out and say, thanks, robot. And then he just like zooms away. So we have like little basic robots, but the human robot dynamics have not changed since he imagined them in 54. In fact, I mean, that's probably why the Will Smith adaptation of iRobot worked so well, because at the core, I mean, it's really about this human who's super uncomfortable dealing with sentient robots and doesn't trust them.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole humanoid aspect of it, like you're saying, is like you still get that like creepy feeling in his books. Like he does this great job of like there's this thing where the detective Bailey, the main character, keeps talking to his robot partner, and then would like stop himself and be like, I don't know why I'm explaining things to this guy. Like, and that's still like totally relate. Like I was in an elevator. I was at a hospital like 4 months ago and was in an elevator with one of these little, like, they look like little carts that carry files to different departments, but it's totally a robot that's like taking files around. And I'm just sitting in the elevator with it, and I felt so creeped out. I was like, I don't know why I freaked out, but I feel like I'm like in Star Wars. It's like watching me. Like, I don't know. Yeah. But then he captures that, like, our, like you were saying, like our natural uncomfort with this like thing that we don't know how sentient it is, how sentient it isn't. And he does. It's perfect. Yeah. He does a great job.
And I think it's exacerbated too, because at least now the robots, like they look like tin cans, they're like R2-D2 type robots, right? Where you're like, oh, that is clearly a robot. Whereas in Asimov's universe, they look so much like human, and that's part of the confusion and where the tension comes from, because he's like, this dude looks human, but he doesn't sleep. And I remember reading the book and him, there's like this long scene where Bailey has the robot partner in his apartment, and he's just like, he doesn't sleep. Is he like watching me when he sleeps? This is super freaking weird. And it was so funny because I was like, thinking that I probably would be uncomfortable with that too, if the guy just like turns into a corner and powers down in your living room and you're like,
Yeah, I'd totally be right there. I'd be like, I don't want, you have to go sit outside. Like, anyway. Yeah, I'm totally with you.
So in the discussion of the actual story elements, we're going to try to avoid spoilers if we can. But I just wanted to start by reading a brief description, the blurb from the book. So if you're one of the 1% of the population who hasn't heard of iRobot or doesn't know the basis of the universe, this is the blurb for The Caves of Steel, which is book 1. A millennium into the future, 2 advancements have altered the course of human history: the colonization of the galaxy and the creation of the positronic brain. Isaac Asimov's robot novels chronicle the unlikely partnership between a New York City detective and a humanoid robot who must learn to work together. Like most people left behind on an overpopulated Earth, New York City police detective Elijah Bailey has little love for either the arrogant spacers or their robotic companions. But when a prominent spacer is murdered under mysterious circumstances, Bailey is ordered to the outer worlds to help track down the killer. The relationship between life and his spacer superiors, who distrusted all Earthmen, was strained from the start. Then he learned that they had assigned him a partner, R. Daniil Oliva. Worst of all was that the R stood for robot, and his positronic partner was made in the image and likeness of the murder victim. I think that's the real twist too, right? Is that the murder victim in this first book looks like the guy
Yeah, looks
that he's
like the
been
guy
partnered with.
that's his partner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because so
which would totally creep me out.
remind me who the victim was. He was somebody
The
famous.
victim is he's the inventor of this like advanced humanoid robot. So he's like king of the robots.
Right.
And he's developed like R. Daniil is like this special version of the robots that are like way more human than anything else Bailey's ever seen before, which is kind of tripping him out because like we were saying, they have robots that look human, but they clearly behave like robots. So it's like, oh, that's a robot guy. Like there's a scene in a shoe store where there's a robot helper. Yeah, and everyone knows from the robot's behavior and demeanor, like that's a robot. But our Daniil has this like ability to blend in and is like kind of like a 2.0 of this. Well, and they talk about it, he's actually like a 50.0, but he's like the advanced version that this guy created and was then supposedly murdered for his work in robots. Like that's the idea, is that like he's this advanced scientist, somebody knows he's there, and they've killed him for this, like for who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's also so the people living in the colonies are the spacers. Correct me if I screw this up. The people living in the colonies are called spacers. And this doctor is a spacer, but he's been hanging out in New York because he's testing to see if his robots can make it amongst the human population,
right.
Which adds to the creepiness of the book because you're like, what? He's been doing what?
Yeah.
Like, what's he doing? Yeah. But that's the idea, is that like he's in this in between. He's staying in, he was killed in Spacetown, which is this in between New York and the colonies where like the spacers come to interweave themselves with New Yorkers. That's so how I got it anyway.
No, I think you're right. And like any scientific genius, he comes with a significant amount of ego. And so of course he builds this robot as an exact replica of himself, because it's not already creepy enough. So it might also be helpful for people to, one thing we both really liked was the world building. So I thought it might be helpful to kind of describe to the world. So basically everybody lives in these steel domes. So maybe this is one of the classic depictions of like dome cities, but New York has expanded to encompass like New York and New Jersey, and it's all under this giant steel dome. And so on top of all of these like strange dynamics between the humans and the robots, all of the humans are now super agoraphobic and they're afraid to go outside. So that kind of confines everything to the story world. And it was funny, I was reading about it on Wikipedia. Apparently people read this and they were like, oh, it's so weird. Why would you be confined? And Asimov was like, what do you mean? It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, that's really funny. Yeah, and I can totally see it too. And it's weird that like, part of what I love about what Asimov does is he like creates, he doesn't go into like this huge like world building paragraph, right? Like he's not like, and all the cities are in domes and no one, he just like weaves it in. Like he's talking about in the opening chapter, he's talking about the like police commissioner has glasses, and like they're talking about how like, yeah, they're not real glasses. Well, they are real glasses, but the police commissioner doesn't necessarily need to have them. Like it kind of shows that he's like old fashioned, because he has them, and the commissioner has a window in his office, and it doesn't appear to actually like look on anything. It's just like there, but they're like, nobody has windows anymore. Like that's just like this. He's old fashioned for having a window. Like it's that weird kind of, but that's what Asimov does. Like he doesn't just say like everyone's enclosed in these spaces, and he like unveils it in like these small, minute ways until you finally get this big picture of, yeah, all these people are like locked in these boxes and live on these weird schedules, and like they all eat meals together and then go back to their apartments, and like everybody has this like very strange, and there's a really weird caste system going on where like you earn your right to live in like bigger spaces. Like, so if you're a slow earner, you live in like pretty much like squalor crap, but like if you earn higher levels, you get bigger apartments and like more ability to move around the box. And yeah, it's a really interesting world.
It almost felt like the whole society was one big dorm room. right? Because they all live in their apartments, but the apartments don't have any bathroom facilities in them, and they don't have any kitchens in them, and none of them eat at home or make their own food. So they all go to like these cafeterias, and then they go to the gym and they shower there, and then they come home and they sleep there, and it's like life is very compartmentalized into these little boxes, and it kind of takes away some of their freedom too, right? Because they're in these domes and they're trapped in these boxes, and they feel like they can't do anything without the social pressure, and that really adds a lot of tension to the dynamic between the robots and the humans, and also between the Earthmen and the spacers, right? Because the spacers are like on these other colonies, on these very low population worlds where they can move around freely, and they live under the open sky like crazy people. And then all the Earthers,
like insane people.
Yeah, like insane people, exactly.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. That social dynamic is very strange, and like you said, the social class based on income was really prominent, and it's almost a dystopian future in a way, even though we've supposedly colonized all these other worlds.
Yeah, and there's a funny moment in the book. This is how I read it. So if you read it differently, let me know. Because there is stuff that Asimov like leaves up for interpretation. Like he doesn't just like lay it out for you detail by detail. He says like, and then they went here, and you're gonna have to. But they keep talking about this place, Space Town. So like the Spacers don't come into New York, and the New Yorkers think it's because the Spacers are like these arrogant, like I don't want to be around Earth people, but the Spacers later reveal it's like, no, you guys make us sick. Like we get around here, we all like,
right.
We're all like going to die from disease. So
they don't have robust.
I didn't spoil anything in the book, by the way.
They don't have robust.
Yeah, because they don't live like they're not used to living in the steel caves, so like they can't go into the steel cave.
They're filled with germs. So, the steel caves are filled with germs.
Yeah. So to meet with a spacer, you got to go through like this like detoxification process, and then they kept saying, and you meet them at Space Town, which he kept saying is part of New York and Space Town. So I kept thinking there's going to be some big scene where he like gets on a spaceship and like flies to the moon or something. But it seems to me that Space Town is actually just like outside. Space Town is like outside the dome. That's Space Town. And I was like, oh, it's not Space Town like outer Space Town. It's Space Town like open space. Like just like you just like walk through this shower. Because later they talk about one of the, intricacies of the plot is like, how would somebody get out into Space Town to kill this famous doctor? And the spacers reveal to him like, oh, there's like a billion ways out of the steel cave. Like there's like joints that don't meet. There's like vents you can crawl through. There's like all this. And Bailey's so confused. He's like, what? No, everything's locked down. And they're like, no, it's like super porous. Like you can just come in and out all you want. Nobody watches the sewers. Like you just come out of the sewer. And it wasn't until they started talking about that I like connected like, oh, there's no spaceships in this sci-fi. They're literally just walking outside. Like that's how you meet with the people from the colonies. You just go outside. Yeah. Anyway, I found that really hysterical. That there was like the Bailey's perception is that like outside of the steel cave is the same as like the moon. Like they're just this different. Yeah. And that he believes he's completely sealed in, but that it's actually very easy to travel in and out. You just have to know where the old kind of holes in the cave wall are. Yeah. Anyway, I thought that was fascinating.
He definitely has a sense.
Was there anything that stuck out? Yeah. Yeah.
He does. He has a sense of humor
about the world.
Well, that was interesting. It's almost like the space, like the ways to get outside, because it's so porous, but they all think it's solid. It's almost like they've trapped themselves there. It's like a mental prison more than it is an actual physical prison.
That's so true. Yeah, it's very true. The part that I didn't get, which you can explain to me if possible, is there's this whole thing about skipping roads and like skip travel, and I totally got lost.
So I think
was lost. Did you follow? Because at one point they're being chased.
Yeah.
And when they're being chased, Bailey talks about how he used to be this juvenile delinquent.
Yeah.
That like skips down all of these alleys. But I couldn't figure out if they were on foot or if they were in a car. Like,
were they on like moving sidewalks?
That's what it felt like, but I couldn't tell because there are cars. Like at one point they get in the car.
Yeah.
So there are
I'm
cars.
not sure.
Yeah. And they're moving super fast. Like it's super, super light speed. And that was one of those moments where I was like, I wish that you would explain this more. Because
Yeah.
it felt like sidewalks that move at like 60 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really good at like jumping from sidewalk to sidewalk, and he's not supposed to.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Yeah, but then again, I was like, but how is he moving at like 60 miles an hour on a sidewalk? Like, how does that even work in the open air? Like, isn't he like gonna fly off? Like, I don't know. That was the only part of the world building that lost me. I was like, yeah. But if you're into that whole like world building thing, you know, he goes over in this like it's fairly short book. Like, it's not a long book, but it's not like you're reading like a Tolkien book where it's like, you know, 300, 400 pages. Like it's a pretty short book, but in this fairly short book, he covers like energy and like how the steel caves get energy. He talks about like cave relations and like how New York relates to like the rest of the East Coast. He talks about colonization. He lays out like what the colonies are like. He talks about like food production and like yeast. He talks about air filtration. Like he covers the whole world. And then there's the whole like, oh, there's robots. Like there's the whole like just the background of the world. Like he covers so much space in this like really short book. It was as a writer, I was in awe. I was like, damn, like that's.
Yeah, I mean, he's very talented, and the way he weaves it all together, it just seems so natural. And you know, I always kind of struggle with this as a writer too. Is like, how many hints can I drop, and you know, how do I make sure that all of the world building bits are consistent? But it just seems so effortless for.
Yeah, it's just like a sentence or two here and a sentence or two there. And I mean, sometimes he goes into more detail, but and sometimes you can tell he's like working world building into the plot.
Yeah.
Like there's they go visit a robot scientist at one point, and it's pretty clear, like, oh, the point of this scene is to explain to us how the robot laws work, like why robots have these.
Yeah.
I think there's 3 laws. Yeah. But anyway, there are those moments in the book, but they don't feel awkward. Like
there were
they feel
definitely
very
a
much
couple
part of the
moments
plot.
where I thought, oh, this is a little bit old fashioned, or oh, he's telling us about like the laws of the world, or he's telling us like there was one section where he was talking about Bailey's wife and her relationship to they're kind of like a political or a religious faction, and he was talking about how you know, some people are old fashioned and some people are new fashioned, and there's like these different mindsets and how they view the world. Like they're different, like worldviews are different, almost religious sects, I felt like. And I was like, what? Why is he telling us this? This has no point.
Yeah.
He tricked me because I disregarded, you know, like a 2-page passage that became crucial to the plot later. And I was like, oh my God, that was part of history, right? He was like boring me on purpose and telling me this stuff that I thought was nonsense on purpose that then became absolutely pivotal to how the story resolved itself. And that kind of made it seem brilliant to me, because I was like, oh, you bored me. Like his control of the reader is so good that I feel like he bored me intentionally, and then like pulled the rug out from me afterwards. And I was like, wow, you know, and this is very typical of an Asimov story. His short stories are like logic puzzles, but I think that's why he was such an amazing mystery writer, because he just loves how like all the different pieces put together, and that on top of being a talented prose stylist makes it a very compelling read, even for a book that's 60 years old. So I was definitely impressed by it.
Yeah, I was blown away. I loved all of the world building and everything. So speaking of his depiction of women, this is one of those things that, well, one, it's difficult. There's only one main female lead in the book, which is the detective's wife.
Which, so to be fair, is better than some of his other work. Like the first Foundation novel has 0 women in it, except for this one like shrew at the end who's just like a terrible flat character, and you're like, what is going on? And I think as he started writing, he started to realize like, oh, I actually have to put female characters that have their own opinions and independence into books. So in his defense, this book is better than some of the other ones. I think that was one of the few things about Asimov that actually like tie him to the 1950s is it's a little sexist sometimes.
Yeah, and the woman in the book is totally like a little child. Like she's like a little kid. Like she does something fairly minor at one point, which I won't talk about because we don't want to spoil the ending. But she thinks that she's like going to be carted off to jail, like a kindergartner would be like carted off to jail for like, you know, I took an extra burrito out of the fridge. You're gonna hate me forever. Like it was that kind of like, and even the main character is like kind of like, grow up, Jesse. Like that's his like attitude is like, oh, I wish you weren't such a woman. Like you know, it's just that was really bad. So if you're into sci-fi, you probably need to be prepared that there's not a strong female lead.
Yeah, I would definitely say that more modern mystery books are better about including complex female characters that people and not kindergartners. Not children with female anatomy. Which this book definitely is. Like, you know. That's pretty funny.
Anyway, yeah.
It is funny to see.
Yeah. Was there anything else in the book you thought didn't keep up? I mean, there's the absence of, like you mentioned earlier, there's like the absence of cell phones and like the absence of like any kind of handheld computer in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, but even that stuff, like I noticed it, but it didn't pull me out of the story or bother me to the point where I was like, oh, I have to put this down, you know? And I think that's the thing is you just have to understand that you're like, oh, you're reading a 60-year-old sci-fi book, one of the first of its kind in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Science fiction applied to genre, and that, you know, some of the stuff is a little bit missing, but I think that all the things that people read Asimov for, which is the mystery, is really good. Like the detective mystery, like the main plot is really solid. The interactions between robots and humans, that's where he really excels, you know. And if you just kind of play down the other stuff and you can ignore some of those world building aspects, I think that you could still get a lot of enjoyment out of it. And I certainly did. I thought it was really good.
That's cool. Yeah, his one of the things I thought was really interesting was his take on food, which was fascinating to me. Like he's got a whole thing about building the New Yorkers think they're eating strawberries, but what they're actually eating is like a breed of yeast that they've like worked together. So it's like, you know, really sweet red bread that they've like put together for stuff like that was really fascinating. Like, and you know, I don't know, for the 50s, very progressive understanding of like biochemistry. Like that was there were things that were like, oh yeah, you suck at women and you miss handheld computers, but man, you really hit the biochemistry aspect of it. Like that was that's really yeah. I think the other thing that really shocked me about the sci-fi that I would say like separated this book in my mind from more modern sci-fi tales is Asimov has this like huge hope in the like resilience of humanity. So it's like, it doesn't matter what happens, they're going to succeed. Like at one point, Bailey becomes aware like how fragile his existence actually is. And so a character comes in to talk to him about like, well, what happens if we run out of energy? And the character's like, oh, it's no big deal. We'll just figure it out. Like, it's no big deal. And even in the end, like, even if they don't figure it out, it's like, well, we'll just go to other planets. We'll just do other things. Like, we'll just, you know, it'll be fine. And that's kind of like this deep faith in like human ingenuity is going to solve all problems, regardless of how big those problems are. Very different than like the modern kind of dystopian trope of like, we're screwed and only a small group of us are going to survive and everyone else is going to die. Like it was very, very hopeful that like, yeah, you know, man conquers all in the end was kind of, and I found that kind of refreshing. Yeah. Like, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I found that. Yeah. I like that.
A lot of his stuff is very optimistic like that. And I think that's part of the reason that makes it so enjoyable. Cause you always kind of end on a high note, you know, people definitely die in his books, but I don't think he wrote like, you know, heartbreaking tragedies with a very pessimistic outlook. You know, he was always like, humanity can succeed. I mean, that was what the whole foundation was about. It was about how human ingenuity can pull us across this vast span of time into distant planets, and, you know, how we can see the future and think that, oh, everything is actually going to work out, rather than everything is hellfire.
Yeah. Everything sucks. Even though when you like back up from it, it is a pretty bleak world they live in. But they don't seem to know. So
and Yeah, maybe that's his sense of humor coming through, because it is a bleak world, but he always finds ways to laugh about it, right?
Yeah, it is very funny. It is very like, it seems to be in this book that Bailey is coming to the realization of how like fragile and dark and sad his world actually is. And it comes in like the comparison when he like talks with the spacers about like what their world is like. Like,
Yeah.
it's just this very, all this freedom, and they have robots that like do all the work for them, and they have all this leisure time, and and by the way, they live to be like 500 years old. Like, like huge, like, their life is, almost like Roman god-esque in comparison to the Earth cave people who are like, hanging out in fake sunlight.
And I wonder too if that's part of what Asimov brought to the science fiction genre, because even if you look at the video I did a couple weeks ago about Altered Carbon's dynamics are set up in a very similar way, where there's like one group of people that are immortal, or at least live for a very long time and are wealthy and rich, and everybody else lives in squalor. And another book that is really popular right now, the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. The first book I think is called Leviathan Wakes. I think that's the first book, but the TV show is called The Expanse, and it's often set up in that similar way, where there's like the Earth-Mars coalition versus the Belters. So it's like the haves and the have-nots, and I think that maybe that's one of the reasons that this book seems to hold up the test of time, is because those dynamics seem to be human dynamics, not tied to a certain era.
And it is like thinking back to the 1950s when we're talking about like, the setting, putting a book in the city in the 1950s when you're in the middle of like white flight, right? Like the development of the first American suburbs. It is thinking in that context. You can kind of see how he's taking that and expanding it bigger and bigger. Like, oh, the rich people leave and they build their big houses on Mars. And the rest of us are left here to fight it out in the like squalor of the overpopulated, dirty, dark, dingy steel cave, right? Like, it was fascinating. I don't know if this is a product of like, that's the material that he would have had in the 1950s that would have related, but the image of like a steel barrier, and it's like just very hard industrial material, right? Like when you think about like people living under a dome, it's usually like, well, it's a glass dome, or it's some kind of weird plastic dome, or it's something that gives some kind of exposure to the outside in some way. But Asimov has this picture of like, no, they're cut off. Like, there's nothing. And it does create this very like bleak, dark existence versus this wide open expanse. And it was different. As I was reading it, it was one of those things of like, I wonder if that's where he's drawing this from in his own time. If he's got this like, well, if you watch the cities in the 50s, like this is kind of what's going on, is people are leaving to go, create these beautiful houses with manicured lawns and white picket fences, and leaving those who can't afford to leave back in the cities that are like, industrial world. So it was, there's social commentary happening there that I wish I was smart enough to understand. But that's like, there's it was just interesting to read. And even now, like, as we talk about like, income classes and the conversations about how they're separating and growing, like it's an interesting picture of the future that I think was set at that time, and it's going to keep coming back over and over again. This idea of like economic class determines someone's living existence. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah. My rant about economic class is now over, but that was,
I enjoyed it. I mean, I like that it's still relevant, and that's really all that matters. And that's why I think these books last over time, is because they are still relevant in many ways, even if our perception and relation to them change. So, If anybody wants to find this book, again, it's called The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. You can find it an ebook print, and I think it's an audio too on Amazon. That's where I bought it. It was pretty cheap ebook, which is actually pretty rare for one of these classic sci-fi novels. And it kicks off a much longer series where I presume Bailey gets to go out into Spacetown more and then to some of these other worlds. So maybe it's going to be like how he sees the rest of the universe opening before him, and I'm interested to see how it turns out. But
yeah, I'm interested too. It was a great first start to a series. Yeah, and even if you don't plan to read the rest of the series, you should check it out. It was amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. How about you, Jeff? Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you?
My website is vagrantmisunderstandings.com. So like homeless arguments, vagrantmisunderstandings.com. And then I'm on Amazon, Kobo, Drafted Digital. You just type my name in and find me. I'm in all of those from Barnes & Noble, iTunes. My books are in all those places.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me again. I'll have links in the show notes and, of course, in the comments and everything like that. And it was great to see you, Jeff. Thanks again for the discussion.
Yeah,
really
you too.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
See ya.
Bye.